We are live.
Wonderful.
Okay, it's hooked into Facebook, so I'm gonna hook it to the website and we're good to go.
Great.
Do you want me to play the video right away?
Let's do this.
Hold on.
And if you just want to hit play at the top of the screen, and then it'll make that full screen and you can restart the video then. Perfect. And you should be able to click to start. Just anywhere on the screen. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren LaFay. I am the Assistant Director here at the Abel Contemporary Gallery. We are a gallery located just southwest of Stoughton, 20 minutes south of Madison, or sorry, we are located in Stoughton, just 20 minutes southwest of Madison. And we represent about 90 artists from across the country in a renovated tobacco warehouse in Stoughton's historic art district. We host 3 exhibitions concurrently, and currently we have the work of new work by Carol Chase Bierke and Rick Hintz, a cup invitational featuring the work of 30 ceramicists, and I'm currently here in our number 5 space with Martha Glowacki and her fantastic installation entitled Rituals and Reenactments. For those of you watching on Facebook, you can type in comments, and Anne, who is pulling all the strings behind the scenes here, will read those off to us at the end so we can have a little conversation with Martha. Right now, we are looking at a video of the walkthrough of this installation, Rituals and Reenactments installed in the gallery. And thank you so much for being here, Martha.
Oh, you're welcome.
Martha is an artist, curator, and exhibition designer. She's the former director of the Design Gallery at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and the Wisconsin Academy's James Watrous Gallery. She's particularly interested in investigating the connections between science, natural observation, and art. And she has exhibited at the Chazen, the Madison Museum of Contemporary Art, the Milwaukee Art Museum, the Racine Art Museum, and the John Michael Kohler Art Museum, among others. Thank you so much for being here, Martha.
Thanks again, Lauren. Looking forward to it.
Wonderful. And we can just move on to the next image, and then I'll remind everybody that these recordings are going to be on our website. So you can watch the walkthrough of the gallery and this talk recorded on Martha's page, and also our new video archive that's also on our website. So the first image we're looking at here is a piece called Mouse King, which is really highlighting Martha's interest in cabinets of curiosities. So Martha, how did you come to be interested in these kinds of cabinets? And I understand that you've been doing this since you were a child.
I've been collecting natural history artifacts since I was a child. And really my interest in museums goes back to when I was a little girl in Milwaukee, when the Milwaukee Public Museum was in its former home, this really grand neoclassical building on Wisconsin Avenue in downtown Milwaukee. And when you walked into it, you were really in a 19th century museum space, which made a huge impression on me. And I remember being able to go up into the room where the minerals were stored, for example, and you would be able to open drawers and look inside. And I was collecting rocks and trying to identify them sort of seriously as a kid, you know, so this was fascinating to me. There were skeletons hanging from the ceiling. It was dark. It had narrow wood floors that creaked when you walked on them, and wonderful dioramas, which you and I were talking about last week.
Taxidermy.
So that really started my interest, and it's never left. When my husband and I go on a trip, we always go to museums. It's the main thing. And around 2000, I got quite interested in the history of museums and collecting, and then developed a more formal interest in cabinets of curiosity, the Wunderkammers, and how they transliterated into actual museums over a couple of centuries.
Yeah, and you've done a lot of fantastic work of cabinets of curiosities, both at the Chazen and with the Chipstone Foundation at the Milwaukee Museum of Art, which is both some that probably some of our viewers have recognized you from. So what are we looking at in this piece?
Well, this piece, I guess you could almost call it a little cabinet of its own.
Yeah.
It is a world of its own, but this is a mirror illusion. And my interest in museums and in history of science, it just kind of keeps morphing along. I get interested in one area of the history of science, and then I see images of something else I don't quite understand and get interested in that. And over the last few years, I've really gotten interested in optics and using optical illusions. And this circular mirror illusion, really the idea for one of these dates back to the 1600s or so, post-Renaissance, because the rules for perspective, for putting on a two-dimensional plane something that looks three-dimensional for painters and architects, those were understood and studied. Leonardo da Vinci helped develop those, for example, and Albert Durr. And then at the same time, people started really thinking, what can we do with these rules of perspective to make them read in a way that doesn't really reflect what you think you see in front of your eyes? And so they started really experimenting with different kinds of illusions. And mirror illusions were a predominant form of these kinds of illusions because mirrors were very rare, they were really valued, they were seen as pretty magical, and obviously you and I see them that way too. And so this, I saw images of these mirror illusions of different types in books up in special collections at UW-Madison, and thought the only way I'll figure out how these work is to try to make them. And so here's one.
Yeah, so this is referencing a rat king, which is a almost a fantastical creature that shows up quite a bit in very famous cabinets of curiosities that are a bunch of, usually like a nest of young rats that become tangled together and usually are like desiccated, and that's what's the item that's preserved in the cabinet of curiosity. But this is something that you assembled. Where did these come from?
So these are mice.
Yeah.
And I live in a rural area in the woods, so mice are everywhere.
Yeah.
and used to have a cat that hunted mice and would bring me mice. But at any rate, I have mice skeletons and bits, and I have learned some 19th century taxidermy methods for really making a skeletal mount from bones. So these mice, I decided that the mice should have a mouse king.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone's ever found a mouse king, but here you have a group of mice that their tails are wrapped around a central pole. So it has the look of a rat king. And scattered around them are various kinds of metal pieces, rings with their gemstones, dismounted pins. So there's another story going on here, which I'm leaving to the viewer to think about.
And it almost reminds me, I'm forgetting the name of the device, but an early like proto-film optical illusion that this, if you look at this, it almost looks like the inside might spin or something. And that would kind of give the illusion of the animals moving or jumping or, And
I've really experimented with that idea as well. So one of the kinds of, it's a precursor to motion pictures and the idea that you need 16 frames a second to really get convincing movement on a film. But it's a device developed around the Civil War called a phenakistoscope. A phenakistoscope,
wow,
which is a spinning disc that you have to see in a mirror,
Mm-hmm.
and it has pie-shaped images, which are stop motion, and little slits in between each pie shape, which allude to when you see a motion picture film, you have little gaps between each image, you know, so all of that is part of the way they're processed in your brain. So the phenakistoscope, you look in a mirror, you spin this thing, and you see whatever the image is come to life. You see that, you see the motion.
Oh, interesting.
So yes.
Yeah, so it's like a flaw in our brain chemistry that we're not able to take in these singular images, so it puts it all together for us.
Yeah,
that's really
somehow
interesting.
or other.
Yeah.
And you and I were talking about zoetropes, about making a zoetrope. I think it was you and I last week.
I think it was.
And so that would look more like this, where you'd be looking down into a drum, or looking from the outside with slits in a drum, and you would spin it.
Yeah, and I believe there was one in the Chipstone collaboration you did that was like mice jumping through hoops or something like that.
It did not spin. It was the same kind of illusion as this, but it was on a big circular display mount in the middle of the museum, and children apparently were so frustrated this thing didn't spin that they ran around it trying to make it spin. So yes, I realize I need to do this.
Yeah, next project. All right, next we're gonna look at an image called The Persistence of Nature. And this is we have it's like 3 of these sort of shadow box kind of installations. So are these inspired more by cabinets of curiosities, or there's been several artists throughout, especially the early modern period, that were creating these kind of diorama boxes? Is this sort of a hybrid between them?
It's really a hybrid. Yeah, that's an astute observation. I was really interested in Joseph Cornell, as you can probably tell, and he was working in a shadow box format. He also did a mirror illusion, a circular mirror illusion, which I came upon after I'd made these. But I'll talk about this later, I know, but this work is installed in a building that was made in 1891, I think it was. This building,
yes. Yeah.
And these shadow boxes, I was more inspired by the idea of a Victorian shadow box because of my work in the Wisconsin Historical Society. I was looking at a lot of hair wreaths and things like that in shadow boxes. Yeah. And I really like the idea of being able to hang a piece on the wall like this, but to have actual depth so that you could use 3-dimensional material in it.
And so we took a class together in 2015 at the University of Madison on artists as scientists. And can you talk about the connection that you see between the arts and the science, and how your work kind of inspires that sort of analytical scientific thinking?
Well, for one thing, I'm really interested in how people observe things around them, and particularly how they observe the natural world. And again, as a kid, I was out in nature. I grew up in nature. My father's family are all engineers, so I also grew up with a real analytical way of sort of parsing things and figuring out how they work. I think what interests me most about the relationship between sciences, contemporary science, but also the history of science, is the way that people have observed nature and tried to explain it in a rational fashion over a long period of time, and how even though you may be observing the same phenomenon, the rationale for it has changed. So that interests me quite a bit. And for me, as an artist, or for people who are poets or essayists or novelists who write about nature, we're looking at this from a somewhat different perspective. So I see these as an opportunity to combine actual scientific observation with my more metaphorical way of looking at things.
Yeah, it's really interesting with the combination of the flight of, I can't tell, is that like a heron or some sort of
Actually, in the oval frame in the background is a reproduction of some stop motion photography studies that were done by a man named Etienne Jules Marais. He was a 19th century French physiologist, and he was really interested in developing ways to capture motion with a camera about the same time that Wybridge was working in the United States. And I really am interested in this guy. I've done a lot of reading about him, and I'm also very interested in birds. He studied birds quite a bit. But what you're seeing in this image that you can't see on the screen is that this is a sequential image of a bird flying. The bird is tethered. He's got a harness on, and he's got these long, like a long cord that tethers him to a central pole that he is flying around. And the pressures in his flight pattern and his wing beats are being measured in a way that's way too complicated to explain here. But it's a real, again, it's this very scientific look at how, you know, how does a bird fly, and what are the actual, what's the sequence of the wings and the way the bird holds its wings throughout flight. They were trying to figure that out. And so my bird, who's on the front of that, on that little shelf there, is a very desiccated bird, and he has tethers on him.
That he's, I thought those were broken. That's so interesting. Yeah. Very cool.
Some are broken, some aren't. But so it's, again, just kind of a, I don't know, a sad look. A lot of my work is about like the ideas that you go through these states of change as you live, as any organism lives. You know, you're born, you grow, you fluoresce, you decline, you die, and then what happens? You know, so really this is about that whole idea as well.
Yeah, and a lot of your work features dead animals, but it never quite struck me as morbid. It really, for me, stayed very grounded in scientific observation. Like that I mean, if you go to the Zoological Museum at UW-Madison, people are studying the dead bodies of animals, but they're using that to understand life.
Right.
And
yes.
So that's a really interesting connection I'm seeing.
Yes, and that's certainly part of it. And I also find some beauty in dead things, whether they're dead flowers or whether it's a dead animal.
Yeah, and of course it's the most permanent state of something. It is the most lasting, you know.
Yeah, or at least somewhat longer.
Right, depending on the conditions and the preservation and all that.
All that good stuff.
All right, so next we're going to look at a series of prints that you did with Tandem that are, I understand, documenting our understanding or a understanding of flight patterns and navigation of birds. Can you talk about this a little bit?
I can, and I'll try not to talk for 20 minutes, but
that's great.
This was actually done originally for an exhibition I had on campus at UW-Madison in the Washburn Observatory, which is a historic site. It's an 1870s observatory. And I was able, through the assistance of Madison Museum of Contemporary Art and the astronomy department on campus, to do an installation in the dome, which
so cool.
Nobody's done before or since, for good reason, as it turns out. But the idea of that installation was based on scientific research done by a man named Stephen Emlin, who had been at UW at one point, which interested me, that he had been here in the sciences. And then he went off to, I think, Cornell, and continued this research, but it was about how birds navigate when they're flying. How do they use patterns of light at night? If they're flying over a cityscape, you're flying over Chicago, obviously this is a real guidepost as you're flying, or you're looking at stars in the sky, or planets, or whatever bright lights you're seeing in the sky. How do they navigate? And so he had done studies where he put birds that were ready to migrate into marking cages in a planetarium. And he arbitrarily rotated the night skies. So if they thought they were flying north towards the Big Dipper, for example, it wasn't what was really happening outside. And he found that for a few nights, they'd fly to where they thought the Big Dipper was in the planetarium, and then they would right themselves. Something changed and they would fly in a different direction that was the correct direction. And so that was what could be a more fascinating thing for an artist? I thought, wow, what can I do with this? And so that was the basis for that whole exhibition in an observatory. I mean, what could be better? in the fall during migration period.
Yeah.
So this piece was really looking at that research, but mostly about how different people observe nature. And there are 5 big panels which have a star chart, 1820 star charts in the background, and then various kinds of astronomical diagrams, diagrams that are all taken from historical books, rare books, of bird skeletons and birds in flight, you know, just diagrams of what their bodies look like. But then there are also 3 voices of observers that go through this, and 2 of them are more scientific observations. There's kind of a meandering thing that alludes to the Milky Way that flows throughout this, which is a list of how the principal stars in the constellations rise and fall over, you know, a night. And it's early, I think it's from the 1700s, maybe it's very poetic. And then there's also another voice, which was an observation done in the 1880s by an astronomer at, where was he? He was northeast somewhere of the United States. And he was observing the moon and happened to see birds flying across the lit disk of the moon. Was the migration period. And because he knew the angle of the telescope and the moon, he was able to figure out how high up these birds were flying. And he wrote an article at the time for an ornithological journal, which was amazing. They were flying 1 to 2 miles above the ground, and people had no idea they could do that.
Yeah.
So there's a very scientific voice. It's got equations in it. And then the third voice is a poem called Snow Geese by Madison poet Mary Mercier. And she writes about, as a poet, observing geese flying and all of the things she feels about that. And it's very beautiful, very lyrical.
What a beautiful combination of narratives all woven together there. That's so interesting. Can you talk about, so your art is usually based so thoroughly in installation and physical objects. What was it like for you to try to translate some of that into a 2-dimensional piece?
For the one that, for the tandem thing, going back a little bit, they were mostly 2-dimensional original pieces. They're much bigger. They were a different colorway. Actually, it was hard to explain, but this, at any rate, it didn't look so much like a night sky, but they were shadow boxes. And so the original prints also contain bird bones and little mechanical things and you know, dividers and stuff floating across. But I worked with John Houston, a graphic designer, I found images and the text and all that kind of stuff, and we worked together to do the graphic design, because I didn't know how to work in Illustrator. So I guess that sort of answers your question in a way. I've never done prints and don't know if I'll do prints in the future, but it was a good process, interesting process.
Very cool. So next we're going to talk about some of the installation pieces we have in the gallery right now. The one that is behind us and on the screen right now is called Moving Out. And I really would like you to talk about, what was it like working in a number 5 space? Because this is configured very differently from how it's been in other iterations.
When I came into this space at first, I thought, this is going to be tough. This is really difficult because you have the bones of this really beautiful old building exposed on 2 walls of this space. And also you've got all the original beams that you can't see on the screen and a floor that's really shows all the marks of people working in here for 100 and whatever years. And then you've got 2 really pristine gallery walls that don't go all the way up to the ceiling. So it's kind of a schizophrenic space, I think. But I felt like, because so much of my work and the objects I use in my work come from the same time period as this room, and the colors I tend to use in my work, I feel like could blend into this room and be effective. And I've been doing some pieces that are more theatrical. So I thought, all of this, I should be able to think hard about this and make it work. So what did I do? I went home and thought about it and came back down and finally came up with something that I thought would work. So it was a process too.
And can you talk a little, so many of the images you're drawing on and ideas come from the 19th century. Why is that a time period you're so fascinated in?
Well, I think part of it certainly was, again, going back to growing up with that museum, which was a real 19th century look at the world at that time. But as a graduate student, I've always been interested in history, and my parents, we would spend time visiting historic sites all around Wisconsin. So I grew up with somewhat of an interest in Wisconsin history. And then as a very broke graduate student with work study, I got a great job at the Historical Society, Wisconsin Historical Society, in their museum down in the catacombs, working. And again, I had no background in how to do this, but I was researching and describing on little 3x5 cards, handwritten out, objects that they were considering as accessions for the museum. So these were things that people brought in for them to look at. And we had to decide, are they worth it?
Yeah.
So I was working, and what I was working with was not clothes, not archaeology, not weapons. So it was everything that was left over, which was really domestic goods, tools, farm equipment, you know, all sorts of stuff, furniture, house furnishings, cooking equipment. So I got really interested in the objects and the look of the objects. And of course I was working in this big museum storage area, often in a little desk where only I was lit up and the rest of the museum, or the rest of that storage area, was dark. So, you know, it was pretty mysterious.
Yeah.
It was, I got very interested.
Yeah. So many of the objects here feel like they kind of have a life of their own. I guess, how do you go about assembling them together? Like, how do you, I mean, I could see the connection between there's, you know, the boys with the bird cage and the bird cage, but how do you start to assemble these environments? Yeah.
One thing people don't realize about my work, generally speaking, unless they know me or follow what I do, is that I use a lot of found objects that I incorporate into my work, but I usually change them in some way. So, you know.
So these weren't black chickens.
No, these were not black chickens. And so I do a lot of fabrication with the objects and kind of blend the lines between what is fabricated and what is found. And these two areas of installation pieces in this gallery, and actually really the whole show to an extent, was themed around people from my collection of 19th century photographs. So the two boys who are sitting on their front porch, I know that photograph came from the Racine area because it said that on the back. And these little boys are sitting on a front porch. One kid looks exceedingly morose, the other one happy. And they have a parrot cage in front of them with a parrot. And I wanted to build what I call a tableau around them. And I decided they're moving out. You know, maybe they're being forced to move, but I wanted them to go on an adventure. And so I wanted them to have some kind of what looked like a French Foreign Legion campaign wagon. And I found this wonderful steamer chest that belonged to somebody in the Ringling family, which was another added bit of interest to it. I had the wagon wheels, and I had a friend who's a blacksmith. He put those wheels together to make, you know, an axle, and then another friend put some wood together to make a handle for it. And, you know, I had other found materials got added to it and put a chicken on top. But at any rate, so it's a real amalgamation of all sorts of found materials, and that's what all this stuff is. And I collect lots of stuff, and I love collecting. Including taxidermy.
And from all different sources, it sounds like.
Like people give me things.
That's a great position to be. Can you talk about the decision? We see in a lot of your work, things are made to be this kind of monochrome black, which is done by covering things with graphite. Where did that idea come from?
Really a couple of different sources. I've spent a lot of time. Some of my favorite things really in the art world are graphite drawings, like the whole history of wonderful graphite drawings. But I also, because I've spent so much time looking at early books about science, I've seen beautiful copper plate engravings on sumptuous paper,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and you see the marks of the plate and the engraving paper. And I love the look of those.
Mm-hmm.
So I, in some ways, see some of the work I do is making those scientific illustrations come alive into a three-dimensional form. I also, a number of years ago, saw an artist who had an installation I was just struck by, and he was putting graphite onto things. I don't remember who the guy was.
Mm-hmm.
It was a long, long time ago, but it stuck in my mind, and I thought, I want to see if I can do that onto three-dimensional forms, because I want them again to have the look of those drawings or those prints. So I started experimenting probably again 20 years ago with powdered graphite on different forms, and have used it ever since, if it suits my needs.
It's just a very stunning aesthetic. I've always been extremely drawn to it.
Well, I also come from a background in metalsmithing.
Oh,
my
really?
original work was in metalsmithing, and of course I was used to working with metallic, different sheens in metal, and you know, different metal colors and stuff. And the graphite looks like gunmetal or you know, some beautiful sheeny metal surface.
Yeah, and it really inspires a very particular kind of looking, again, almost scientific, because it is so devoid of color and any other something. You pay so much more attention to texture and line and form. That's really
exactly
lovely.
Exactly. So with the chickens behind us, for example, the color in their feathers is, you know, it's now monochromatic, and because I can burnish the graphite, you see just what you're saying. You really appreciate how those feathers lay down on the chicken's body. I've also found that there's a piece I have in the Chazen collection which has a dead cat in a drawer, and I see that dead cat, which has been graphited, as almost a medieval tomb sculpture. You know, so you made it to look like a different material than a desiccated cat carcass, even though that's what it is, but it transforms it. It makes it easier to look at, I think, because you can distance yourself from it. So there's less of a, you know, it's a weird push-pull reaction when people see it. You know, they want to look at it, they realize what it is, and they just say, I can't look at that. But it softens it in that way.
That's such an interesting piece, actually. That was the first time I ever went to the Chazen was with a school trip in like probably 2000. And that was one of the first pieces. And I think you might have even been there. I think that was one part of the larger Cabinets of Curiosity installation.
Oh my gosh, that was 2000.
And
you were a little kid.
A little kid, and I just remember I had pet cats and just feeling so disturbed, but so intrigued by it. And it stuck with me for so long that I ended up writing my first capstone seminar paper on that piece, just because it had stuck with me so we go way back.
We do go way back, even before we knew it.
Right, I know. So kind of a different, little bit of an aesthetic, but a similar sort of thing you're doing is in this next installation piece called Al's Orchestration. So what are we looking at here?
Well, you see Al there in the left background, and Al is from a cabinet card, and I love this cabinet card of Al. It says on the back, all it says is Al, so I'm assuming it is Al, Al's guy. He's wearing a dress, and he's got a very kind of simpery, funny look on his face. And he's got a little, sort of like a buggy whip, and his dress has stars all over it. And he's got girly shoes that don't look comfortable and white stockings. And I just thought, this guy needs a job. He's dressed up. I think he's probably in a Gilbert and Sullivan play or something, but he's all dressed up, and he's got this, you know, baton, kind of little useless whip. So I decided I had to make him making something happen. And just had fun with it. I do have this whimsical side. It's just not all more, but that's what I'm doing.
I mean, it's so interesting because it's just open to so much interpretation. There's so much visual information, and your work is so endlessly, the more you look, the more you get out of it. And it's
a huge compliment.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
It's really incredible. And this is a piece in particular that just sitting in the space with it is an entirely different experience, of course, of seeing it on a screen.
Yeah.
You are part of its space so much.
This piece works, I think, really, really well in this space.
Yeah.
Because when you walk into this room, you look up, when you walk into this whole floor, you look up at these rafters, these amazing rafters. And this piece, so I have these 3 crowns that are from store lamps, 19th century store lamps. So they're counterweights, but they're in the shape of crowns. And they're hanging from chains at different heights. And then there are 3 different stands that are kind of these ornate stands that are at 3 heights to correspond to the heights of the crowns. And on the crown that's highest to the sky, or whatever you want to think of it as, there's a very large hornet nest that's been made up in that crown.
Yeah.
Which, you know, maybe hornets would do. On the other hand, it's kind of blocking your route up there.
Right.
And the squirrels have it down. So there are 2 squirrels in the middle, and they're on a branch, climbing the branch, and the one on the top is reaching towards the crown. And it's really fun to watch people react to that, because the squirrel is about what? He's about 8 inches down from the crown, and he's a squirrel. He could just jump right in there.
And just the aesthetics are so interesting. That everything coated in this kind of bronze color makes it look like a bronze sculpture, instead of, you know, there's kind of like this pile of hair or tassels or something, and it just really transforms all these elements into sculpture, even though lurking beneath that veneer are the actual very real objects.
Or objects I've made. So that's not hair.
Oh, okay.
But it looks like hair.
It's
which
very
is
convincing.
What I wanted it to do. And it's braided very fine cotton fiber.
Yeah.
But I wanted to use a pile of hair because when I was a girl, I had very long hair, which, you know, reached down, you know, to my upper thighs.
Wow.
And my mother would braid it, and I was identified in part by those braids, you know, this little tomboy kid who collects bones with these long braids.
We would have been such friends.
Yeah, we would have been. And I actually have a photograph that was taken of me before I got my hair cut in 7th grade. And it's in our backyard. I'm in a t-shirt and shorts, which is kind of ironic, but I have my hair out.
Yeah.
You know, so it's also like a 19th century Victorian
Absolutely.
photograph of somebody showing their hair.
Yeah, and that was such a culture in the 19th century around hair and saving hair, even hair that was, you know, they picked through the brushes
and I still have my hair.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, I saved mine too.
Well, and also the woman who cut my hair, you know, so this was in the mid 60s, and she said, oh, you have to have a fall made out of it because, you know, like hair, you know, hair extension, whatever.
Yeah.
And so my hair was cut really short. And I also had to get glasses, these doinky little early 1960s glasses. And when I went back to school in the fall, kids did not know who I was.
I bet.
And that was very unnerving. I still remember that awful feeling. And so hair is kind of these braids are sort of
that really adds a whole other context. That's you.
That's me. That's me. Stuck on the ground. But however you interpret it, it's meant to be fun.
Yeah.
And those squirrels need a new life. Yeah.
I really want to encourage people to, if you can, come into the space, experience it, you know, ask us for a chair. You can sit in here and really take in all of this. Because when you start to sit here and really look at things, there's all of these really fantastic resonances that start to pop up. And these pieces really start to talk to each other, I would say, and tell very complex stories between one another.
Wouldn't that be a good thing? That's just what I would want to do as an artist. And I've been hearing from people who've come down here that the installation is just what they're taken with, especially that works well in the space and with my work.
Well, and you're such a fantastic exhibition designer. So
yes, I've had a lot of experience designing exhibitions, and so it's really fun to do.
Wonderful. Well, Anne, are there any questions from you or anyone else?
we're still waiting for some questions to come in on Facebook, but I was curious, your work is such a graceful combination of found objects and meticulously made objects. And I was wondering if you could talk about how you blend those two seemingly different elements so gracefully in your work.
I think I've just gotten really good at it, Anne. Had a lot of experience. I really love processes and developing new processes. So that I think has stood me well in terms of doing work like this, where you are trying to make things from different materials and blend things together. And I also like collaborating with people. So sometimes I feel like I can't do this. I need a blacksmith to build my, my axle for this cart behind us. But I think my, my aesthetics are such that I'm really drawn to work from whatever culture or time period that uses a lot of different materials and processes. Unlike Anne here, who works, in a very much more austere, rich manner. My aesthetic is different from that. So maybe just from a lifetime of looking too, I've learned how to work with different materials and make them work for me.
Great.
Carlson had a question. He said, wonky question, but how do you apply the pigment to the surface?
Well, again, that depends too on what I'm doing. And I've used lots of different processes for putting pigments on, from using encaustic processes where you mix pigments with wax, to like the piece that Al's orchestration with all the gold pieces, that is spray paint from Ace Hardware on, so it's nothing special.
Yeah.
It's just a very nice, it's because of what it's getting sprayed onto it. I knew it would highlight the form. The graphite you can apply in different ways. I usually put something sticky onto the surface after I've sealed it to make it non-porous. And then when the stickiness I judge is just right, I brush on powdered graphite, which you can get at the farm implement store if you live in the country, like I do. Or you can mix graphite with polyurethane varnish and put it on your walls for something more durable. The way that I use graphite is very fragile. It fingerprints. It will, even though you burnish it, it'll come off on your hands, so it wouldn't be suitable for a lot of things.
Yeah.
Good wonky question. It's one I ask a lot. So.
There's a question from Donna Miller. Can you talk about the piece that has the book and the photo with the name?
I'd love to. It's too bad you can't see this. I'm going to get this book. Can I do that?
Yes, go ahead.
I could just.
Hey, you're the artist. You can do whatever you want.
Because this is just a special. This is a special story for me. So, can you see her?
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Okay. So the woman in this reproduction of cabinet card. So it's a small image that I made bigger. But she's in my collection, and I actually haven't looked at her for years and years and years. But a friend of mine, Andy Krashauer, who also collects cabinet cards, he wanted to come over and see my collection last summer. And he was looking at this one, and he said, she's holding a book in her hand. And he wanted to get a magnifying glass to figure out what the book was. So we did, and I thought afterwards, I have a copy of that book. And it's a book called Earth, Sea, and Sky. It's like an introduction to natural history around the world, so you can learn about animals, you can learn about geography and astronomy, but it's a pretty in detail book, like maybe a teacher might want to have. I'm not quite sure why this woman has this particular book, But if you look at her, she's not beautiful and her hands are big and they're worn, you know, so it's just interesting to me. Who is she?
Yeah.
And so I went into my books and put her on the floor. And I have Earth, Sea, and Sky. And I thought, this is just too strange. This was published in the 1870s, 1880s, and I was given this book. So this is this weird coincidence by John Prown from the Chipstone Foundation, who found this and said, I think Martha would really like this book, and he bought it for me.
Yeah.
So I don't know, it just kind of gave me goosebumps.
Yeah.
So I thought she has to be
The synchronicity.
me. She has to be me in this show.
Yeah.
So she's my, I've been saying avatar, which is not the right word, but alter ego.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Cool.
So
yeah, and it's interesting because cabinets of curiosities are also kind of representations of the owner, the maker's intelligence and knowledge. So it's so interesting to have a figure that kind of stands in for you with her book of natural history, kind of welcoming you into the space that so beautifully fuses natural history and science and art.
Well, another thing I was thinking with the photographs too is like, I collect these photographs, and part of the reason I collect them, I'm really interested in the history of photography and photographic processes, but I also feel like, how did this photo get lost? You know, it's out of his family album. It's, you find these little tintypes and they're out of context. You maybe can find out who they are possibly or where the photo was taken, but some of them just kind of call out to me to be collected, like a dead animal on the road sometimes. You know, it's like I can do something with this and honor it and turn it into part of an artwork. Yeah, it's like, which is kind of sentimental, but there it is. And so that's why I was collecting cabinet cards, and I wanted to use them somehow in an exhibition. And this is the second time I've used them in an exhibition. It really gives you, I love narrative and storytelling, and it gives you a basis for starting a story. So thanks, Donna.
Another question from Barry Carlson. How do you burnish a chicken?
Oh, Barry, I have a few chickens. I could have you over to help burnish.
I come too. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, Lauren can come too. So, what a funny question. So it's powdered graphite on there, and it's a matter of, you have to seal the chickens so that your varnish size, that's going to be the sticky substance that'll help hold that graphite on there, won't soak into the feathers. So it's a multi-step process, and it's just makes you kind of crazy. That's done with friends over a martini or something.
No, we're doing after this then, I guess.
I don't know. We're digressing into the funny here. But yeah.
Are there any else?
Lynn Newhart was wondering who had written the book and when it was published, the Earth, Sea, and Sky book.
Lynn Newhart, she is a history of science person. So who had written this book? You know, mine seems to have lost its title page, which is kind of ripped out here, but I'm trying to remember. I'll have to let you know, Lynn. I mean, it's written over there, but it's too far to go. Ah, here we go. Henry Davenport Northrop, DD, which maybe means Doctor of Divinity, I don't know. And this one was published, I think, 1881, I think. And there was also a German edition, which would interest Ms. Newhart. It's funny, I know some of these people.
It's like you have a following.
All right, one more from Barry. Do you ever feel that you have a desire to live in the times that you reference?
In some aspects, but not. Lately, I've been thinking I don't want to live in this particular time, but I guess yes and no. You know, I would really love to see the landscapes that I've seen in photographs, for example, and to experience some of the things people were experiencing. But there are many reasons I wouldn't want to live in that time. For one thing, I probably wouldn't be able to be an artist.
Right. Or especially wear pants.
Or wear pants, right. So not really.
All right.
Is that it for questions?
That's it for questions. There's a lot of lovely comments from people about how they're.
How fun. Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you all for joining us. Rituals and Reenactments is, as well as new work by Carol Chase Bierke and Rick Hintz and our Cup Show are going to be on view through the end of the year. So there's plenty of time to come out and see them in person. This conversation, as well as the video walkthrough of the exhibition, are going to be on Martha's page, as well as our video archive. And again, thank you so much for joining us. This has been so fun.
Thank you. It has been.
Thank you.